Something very strange happened in the gospel today. Something very strange. You're thinking, well, probably it's the man who was possessed by the demons. That's not something we experience every day, so that's kind of strange. And the devils were cast out of him. Or it's not every day that sight is restored to the blind, so that's kind of strange. But really, those are exactly the things we should expect from God, because he is God, and this is what he does. He brings about wholeness and healing and life. So that's not really strange at all. That's what we should expect from God. What's strange is, how are these two blind men following Jesus? If they're blind, how could they follow Jesus? And not only did they follow him, they followed him all the way to the house where he was going. How strange. Well, they had to be listening to the Lord. They had to be attentive to the voice of the Lord as he was going along the way and proclaiming the good news of salvation and announcing the coming of the kingdom of God. But there was a whole crowd of people there too. And surely, and we know that there were people who were shouting out for Jesus' attention, just like these men. We know that there were people who were shouting out against Jesus, like the Pharisees. And so these two blind men had to follow Jesus, listening intently to him, in order to be with him where he was going, so that there the Lord could speak directly to them and bring them the wholeness and healing that they desired. But first, they had to listen, and they had to be attentive, and they had to follow in faith. They had to be attentive and unwavering, despite the shouts of the crowds, despite the noise that was rising up over them. They had to be attentive to the Lord, because then they were able to receive the healing that God desired for them. Isn't the same true for us? We follow God. We don't see where we're going. We don't see down the road what God has in store for you and for me. We don't see down the road what God has in store for our lives, for our families, for our friends. And sometimes we can get worried, and we can get caught up in fears or doubts or anxieties or uncertainties. But God doesn't call us to look ahead. God calls us to listen. God calls us to listen for him. God calls us to listen to him proclaiming the good news of salvation. God calls us to listen to him calling us out to newness of life. God calls us to listen to him and be attentive to his voice, despite all the voices rising up inside of us that try to call us away from him, despite all the voices that surround us in our world and in our culture calling us away from him. God calls us to listen to him and to follow him. Because the eyes of those blind men weren't open because they saw Jesus. They saw Jesus because they had faith, and they followed Jesus. Their faith came first. They listened to the Lord. And it was then, and only then, that he said, "What do you want me to do for you? And do you believe that I can do this?" But first came their faith, and they followed not knowing where it would lead them, but certain that wherever it was, it would be where the Lord had called them to be, and there he would work their salvation. So let's be people who come in faith today to the church. Let's be people who go out the doors in faith. Let's be people who enter our life and our world and our families in faith, listening to the voice of God, not knowing where he's going to lead us, but listening above all the other voices and shouts that would try to take us away from him, following him in faith, because then we, like the blind men, will see his salvation, because Jesus first proclaims the kingdom of God. Jesus first proclaims the good news of salvation, and then he cures diseases and infirmities. First must come God. First must come his kingdom. First must come his salvation, and then God takes care of the rest. So let's go forth, listening in faith to the voice of our God, and be unafraid to follow wherever he will lead us, despite the shouts and the noises of the crowd, knowing that then the eyes of our hearts, the eyes of our minds will be open, and we will see the glory that God has in store for us.
Praise